Hello everyone! I'm really excited to introduce this new project. These are embroidered ornaments that feature like a little plushie and then a tassel. They were inspired by the art of Chiapas, Mexico. So you can see I have some different examples here. Some of them are two-sided, and like the sun you saw is only one-sided. Today we're going to walk through all of the steps. To begin with, think about a shape you can make that's about the size of the palm of your hand. These are going to be ornaments that can hang, so we want to keep them a little bit smaller in scale. Keeping the shape bigger and more simple versus like the sun one, where it was a little bit trickier to sew, you can think about a few different varieties of shapes to make. I think for my example today, I'm going to be using this heart shape. Now, if you're making something symmetrical like this heart, you can fold the paper in half, that way you can get it to match. We will need two of these pieces, so we'll need a front and a back. So try to find a scrap of felt, fold it in half, and see if you can fit on your pattern piece. Now, before you start cutting, use some pins. These are sewing pins, so you can see they have a head, and then they have the needle part. So you're going to insert them all the way through the material. Careful not to poke yourself. And then bend and slide them in place. These pins help your pattern piece from slipping as you're cutting out your pattern. Using bigger scissors, you carefully cut them out. You are doing everything in doubles. So I have my yellow heart, which is the big part of my design. And now I'm going to organize some scraps and think about what designs am I going to be sewing on. So this is like an applique. We're going to create, for this one, hearts inside hearts. So I'm folding and pinning a new piece onto another color, cutting out my next shapes. And if you're folding the felt, you can always get two pieces at the same time. Remember, we reviewed our 3 different types of stitches. You can use any of these for this project: running stitch, whip stitch, or the blanket stitch. We are using embroidery floss and sharp embroidery needles. So our first step will be to thread our needles, taking one end and sliding it through the eye of the needle. We are not matching the 2 tails up. You're going to have a short tail and a long tail. To do the quilter's knot or the magic knot, hand that long tail to the hand holding the needle, wrap a few times, pinch and slide that knot all the way down from the back. The more you do this, the more your fingers are going to work. Whenever we're doing our first initial stitch, it needs to come from the bottom. You don't want to see the knot on the top of your little embroidered pillow. Pull the string all the way through till the knot stops and start your first stitch. So on this one, I'm doing the running stitch. When we're just attaching the felt onto our piece, you can do a little bit bigger of stitches. If you get a tangle, pause, untangle it, and proceed. Now, I could continue stitching with that same color, or if I want to switch colors, I need to tie a knot so that I don't lose my work. Slide your needle part way under a stitch, wrap around the tip a couple times, and then push to slide it through to secure it. Knotting is very important so that things don't fall apart on you. When you're done with that, you can continue sewing. Maybe think about using different colors or different stitches. If you have an extra piece left over, feel free to add it back to our embroidery floss cards. There's little notches at the end just to help secure so things don't get tangled up. Let's look at another example. All right, so you can see this one has these scallop shapes, and they were whip stitched on. So I have my 2 matching pieces. I'm gonna line up my pieces back to back, and now with my threaded needle, I'm going to do my first stitch. And the first stitch, notice I'm going to poke from the inside, so it's still like underneath. And that way I'm sandwiching the knot in between and nobody's going to see the knot. Decide what stitch you're going to use. I prefer either the whip stitch or the blanket stitch. Remember, blanket stitch is very similar to the whip, but you're just moving the tail of the thread. So you can continue with either stitch. Just make sure that for the edges, your stitches are short, even, and nice and neat. You don't want them to be too long, otherwise your little fluff is going to start to fall out when we do our stuffing. Some parts are going to be a little bit thicker, so you can see I'm actually going through 6 layers of felt there. Just make sure that you're working real careful around those thick edges so that your stitches are nice and even. When you get 3/4 of the way around, then you can pause and start adding some stuffing. Some shapes are going to require you to add stuffing in different parts. Like when I did the cactus, I had a lot of very skinny sections, and those needed more stuffing more often. With a nice big shape like this, I can just kind of sew most of it, add the fluff. And I usually like to sew a little bit more of it closed and then add a little bit more fluff along the way. So do what works best for you in this process. When you get to the end, slide your needle under a stitch nearby, just about halfway through. Take it and wrap the tail around the needle, just like we've been doing, so that you can get a knot. And then to hide your knot, this is kind of a nice little trick you can do. Stick your needle in the pillow and try to come out towards an opposite edge. So you can see my needle's poking out. I'm going to pull it through, and this is going to make that knot disappear when I pull it tight. If your short tail gets snagged, like you can see my short tail got snagged in there, just pull that out as well. So that's how you can tie a knot and then hide your knot. Trim the extra string off. All right, now we need to create a hanger so that we have something from the top, and then we need to create the tassel on the bottom. To create the hanger, decide what you want it to be made out of. So you could use just a single strand of embroidery floss. Other ones I've done, like the cactus one, I did 3 strands, different colors, and braided it. And I think I've also used yarn for one of the other hangers. So you can kind of decide which one is a look that you want. So for my single strand here, I'm just gonna double it over, and I'm gonna tie a knot. So that way I have a really long loop above. Pull it tight. And then if you look, you can see I'm left with a short tail and a really long tail, and I did that on purpose. I'm going to thread my needle on the end of the long tail. Don't worry, you don't have to tie any knots for this part, but just thread it. So that way we can start to stitch this on. You want to sew the hanger onto the ornament, so that way it can hang securely. Find a good spot on the top. Try to get it through some of the fabric and under a stitch maybe. And then once you pull through, then you can go through a few times to secure it and tie a knot. Just check to make sure it's secure. All right, our last step of the project is to make a very big tassel. I selected colors that I used in my embroidered pillow part of the ornament. And what I'm doing is I'm wrapping them around this cardboard loom just so that way I can kind of control the length of my tassel. So I'm winding the 3 colors around just enough time so that way it feels thick. I don't usually count. Next, get a medium piece of yarn and cut it off. This is going to be used to tie our first knot, which will make the top of the tassel. I'm going to turn my board over, slide the string under all of the strands, and tie a tight double knot. So you cross, pull, repeat, cross, pull tightly. Leave those 2 tails because you'll need them later. On the other side, cut through all of the ends, and you can set the board aside. Find those 2 top strings again, and then you can kind of organize the strands so that they're going to start going down. with another piece of string, and this one's going to be a little bit longer. You can use just one color or you could use all of your colors. It's kind of up to you. This one's going to help make the head of the tassel. So I'm laying it so that I have a short tail and a long tail. I'm just going to put one knot in here, and then holding the shorter tail, I'm going to take that long tail and I'm wrapping it tightly around just to help cinch the tassel and give it that really good like squid head shape. After you wrap it, you're going to tie your second super tight double knot once, and zooming in, you're going to do it a second time. All right, cut off those extra ends. If your tassel ends look a little uneven, you can give your tassel a haircut. So kind of lay them flat, and then you can line them up and just carefully give them a trim with your scissors. For your final step, you're using those two tails at the top, and a yarn needle is going to work really good for this part. So grabbing a plastic yarn needle, thread one end of your yarn through. And right now you're just trying to slide it under one of your stitches. So make sure you get under a stitch, slide it through, so that way one of your yarn tails is going to be under the stitch, and you got the other one. Oops, I lied, you got one more double knot. This is our last double knot here. Okay, cross, pull, tie tight. Trim off any excess, and then your tassel ornament is complete. I hope you enjoyed this. We learned so many different skills. Lots of sewing, but we also learned applique and tassel making. It really is a great fiber art project that is going to be so special for you to keep forever.